Hey there, and thank you so much for joining me here at Homeschool with Brittany. My name is Brittany, and I am a homeschooling single mom to an only child who is currently a junior in high school. And this video is going to be a continuation in a series that I am doing about how to establish your home education program if you're starting off brand new. The last video was all about the paperwork that you need to file, particularly if you are like me and you are in the state of Florida. That was step one. Step two in the process of establishing your homeschool program is choosing a curriculum. So that is what this video is going to be about today. I want to jump right into it. We are going to talk about 5 different approaches that you can take to establishing your curriculum or choosing a curriculum for your student. There are a ton of options out there that you really can choose from. At the end of the day, it really is going to depend on what works best for you and your child, and specifically how your child learns best and really what's going to be the most beneficial for them. So I'm going to give you 5 options today. We'll talk about a 6th option as well that some homeschooling families have decided to undergo. And there's, like all of these options, there's no like one right way or a wrong way, the best way, nothing like that, because again, it just depends on what works for you, your student, and your family. So let me go ahead and get my notes. I have a lot that I wanted to go over. The first option that we are going to discuss is a parent-led home education program. And really, one of the things that I want to make sure that you understand is that when it comes to homeschooling your students, really what we're doing is we as parents are in charge of the education process. So that's first and foremost. But when it comes to parent-led education, what I mean by that is that you as a parent are going to be the one choosing what it is that your student learns, and you're going to be the one who is teaching that material as you see fit. So basically, you're the teacher. And I'm going to, for all of these different options, talk about some pros and some cons so that you can get a little, an idea of what this might look like and how this might benefit you, or maybe how some of these options may not be the best fit for you. But again, it's all so that you can make your own informed decision as to what's best for your family. So let's talk about pros of the parent-led approach to teaching your student. First of all, you are in control of what your student learns. Like, you are literally the one who is going to be creating the lesson plans. You're choosing whatever textbooks you want to use or whatever materials you want to use. You are in control. And so that is definitely going to be a pro if this is something that you're really wanting to have a handle on, right? So you don't want someone else teaching your kids. You want to teach them what it is that you want them to know from your perspective. And so that parent-led approach really does allow you to do that because, again, you're creating everything. And so it's up to you what your child learns and how you choose to teach it to them. Another pro with this is a great approach if your kids are a little bit younger, right? So this is probably going to be the easiest to implement with younger kids, those elementary age kids, because for the most part, we've all gone through elementary school, right? So we're familiar with the course material. There is not, for the most part, unless your student is super advanced, there's not going to be anything that's going to be too challenging of a material for you to either, relearn or kind of freshen up on. Teaching it, though, might be a little bit different. And so you're going to have to find a way to be able to teach the material to your students in a way that works for them, in a way that they will be able to actually learn and retain that information. So even though The pro to that is that you're already familiar with this information. It can be a con if you're not really to invest in learning how to best teach your child. This can also be a con once your kids get a little bit older, right? Because when we get to the middle school and the high school grades where students are taking more advanced classes, you might not necessarily know how to teach that material to your students. I think about it this way. Here in the state of Florida, when it comes to teacher certification, and just a little bit of background about me, I was a certified teacher in Florida. Prior to homeschooling my daughter, I taught middle and high school level English and language arts. So that is what my degree is. So I've been through the certification, the teacher certification process. In Florida, the way that it works is you as a teacher can get certified to teach many different subject areas and many different levels, but there is a main elementary certification that allows you to teach grades K through 5, all of the subject areas that are covered within grades K through 5. But then there also are separate certification levels for, or certification areas for teachers who are going to be teaching middle and high school level students. So while in elementary school, certified teachers can teach elementary English, elementary math, science, that kind of thing. When it comes to middle and high school, they have to have coverage or certification in those individual areas, because the state knows that just because you are great at teaching and have knowledge of course material for math, that does not mean that you can and should be teaching science or social studies, history, that kind of thing. So they do separate those out. And I say all of that to say that you should not really expect yourself to be able to teach high school level calculus and American history and English 3 honors. Like, no one teacher is going to really be able to facilitate all of those lessons on their own, even if they are certified through the state, because again, the state requires you to have these different certification areas when the students get older and progress through onto middle school. So please don't feel bad if you're like, okay, wait, what am I going to do when my kid gets to middle school, when they get to high school? Because I don't know, I only know what it is that I know. It is something that you're going to have to deal with. And again, that can be a con of this approach, the teacher-led or parent-led approach to home education. Another con is that the process of creating your lesson plans, creating your assignments, creating your assessments, that is a lot. It's very time consuming. And again, I used to teach middle school and high school English, so this is something that I am very familiar with. Doing all of that, like basically you're doing the work of a teacher who has a ton of students, up to like 100, 125 students, but you're only doing it for your 1, maybe 2 or 3 students who you are teaching individually. So it is a very time consuming process, and that is something that I really want you to think about before you choose this approach. Another con for this parent-led approach is if for whatever reason your student does not pick up the materials, if they don't learn what it is that you are teaching, really there's no one else to blame but you as the teacher. And I'm not saying that to be mean, I'm not saying that to kind of shun anybody, but the reality of the situation is if someone else is teaching our kid and our kid doesn't learn the material, then we can easily say, okay, well, maybe it was the teacher, they didn't know how to teach, whatever the case may be, right? That would be when we would go out to the school and talk to the teacher, the principal, and try to figure out a solution. In this instance, when we're the teacher, if our kid doesn't learn, then it really is on us as the parent, because we are the ones who crafted the materials did the lesson plans, did the assessments, and the responsibility for our kid to learn the material is on us. So that can definitely be another con. What I would say is to try to avoid this, particularly if you have no experience in lesson planning, which most homeschooling parents don't, would be to find some lessons that align with some type of standards. It does not have to be the state standards for your individual state when it comes to the Department of Education, because again, we do have flexibility in that. We can teach our kids whatever we want, but you want to find course materials that have some type of standards that someone has been using, or another group of maybe homeschooling families has been using to educate their kids, or at least has some type of outcomes, right? So that you can see where your student should be by the end of the course. What should they know? What new knowledge should they have acquired at the end of the course? Because if not, you really don't know whether or not they've learned anything. And the other problem with this is if there is going to be the potential for your student to not have learned the material, then there are also going to be gaps in your student's education. And we don't want that to happen, because what we want is for each course that our kid takes in a certain subject area to build on each other. So I take one course, and then whatever I learn in here is going to help me when I go on to the next course, and the next course, and the next course. So there's that expectation that my kid or my student has learned information in one course before they move on to the next level. And if you are not able to ensure that, there are going to be gaps in your student's education, which then you in turn will need to figure out how to fill. So that is a con with that teacher-led approach, particularly, or parent-led approach, particularly if you don't have any experience in teaching, in lesson planning, that kind of thing. So that's that first approach that you can take. The second approach would be the co-op or homeschooling cooperative approach to education. And really what this is homeschool families in a particular area all really meet together at certain times of the week, certain times of the year, in order to be able to get in that socialization, but also the academic piece. And basically you're learning from each other. So what will happen is you will join a co-op that has maybe some similar values or interests as you do. There are going to be secular co-ops and non-secular co-ops, and you can join whatever one you want to join that is accepting new families. So you'll join, you'll fill out an application, and you will pay a fee, not only for the co-op, but also a fee for your student to be able to take whatever classes that co-op is offering in that particular term or semester. And so once you do that, your student is going to be taking classes with other students, which is great. And those are typically taught by the parents or other members of the co-op who have some type of experience, knowledge, or interest in the subject or the class that they are teaching. So let's talk about the pros of this approach. The co-op approach to learning is, unlike the parent-led approach, the co-op really does take a lot of the stress out of teaching your child, because you're not doing the curriculum planning, right? You're not planning the lessons, you're not creating the assessment, you're not creating any of that. Someone else is doing it on your behalf, and you're paying them a fee in order for them to teach your child. So that is definitely a pro. Another pro is that your student gets to take classes with other homeschooling students. So they are not going to be in this alone. They are going to be around other students whose parents and families have a like-minded approach to education, because this is something you all are choosing to do together. And so that is great, because not only are your kids learning with other kids, but they get to have that socialization piece as well. Another pro is that your kids are going to have access to classes that they probably would not have access to if you were to stick solely to the parent-led approach. So with this, the reason why these co-op parents are choosing to teach a class is it's because it's something that they have an interest in, have a passion in, and they get to teach that to other people's kids. So you may have in your co-op theater classes, chess classes, sewing classes. I know a lot of times those like home economic type classes are offered, which are great for students to learn life skills that they otherwise may not learn. But then they also have access to some advanced placement classes, maybe some advanced or honors level classes that you might not have the capacity to be able to teach. So this is a great way for your students to have access to and to be introduced to some subject areas or some topics that you just don't have the ability or the interest in teaching. And so let's talk about some cons of this approach to homeschooling kids. Is one of the issues is that you are not going to have any control over the course materials because you're not teaching the class. So this is different from that parent-led approach where you pick out everything and you teach it the way that you want to teach it. In this instance, someone else has done the legwork, which is great because that means you don't have to do it, but also someone else is going to be at the front of the classroom teaching your child what they think is important in that subject area. So you lose your control in that way. Another con can be the price. As I mentioned, we are paying for these courses. We're paying for another parent, homeschooling parent, to teach our kids, and they do get compensated for that. So you will need to pay a fee. It depends, the price of the fee or the amount depends on the co-op and whatever fee is set there. But it may be cost prohibitive for some families to take this approach, because if you want to your student to take multiple classes, that's going to be multiple fees. And if you have multiple students taking multiple classes, then that can definitely add up very quickly. I would say another con to this method is that you really, as a parent, are going to be on someone else's schedule, right? So yes, you have access now to these classes and your students can take classes that they otherwise would not be able to take, but you don't get to choose when the class is offered, at what time it's offered, on what day it's offered. That is going to be set by the co-op. That is going to be set by whoever's teaching the class, and you really just have to adhere to that. So if you have a student who is pretty busy, or maybe let's say you have two students who are taking classes, but the classes are on different days, then that might just become a logistical issue that you'll have to work through if you want to have them take those co-op classes. All right, so we've talked about parent-led education, we've talked about co-ops or cooperatives, and now let's talk about virtual education. And we're going to talk specifically about part-time virtual education versus full-time virtual education, and I'll tell you why. When we're talking about part-time, I'll give you the example of the provider in our state, in the state of Florida. It's called Florida Virtual School, or FLVS. They have a part-time version and they have a full-time version. The part-time version is where your student is homeschooled and they can take, let's say, one or two classes here or there when they feel like it. They're not obligated to take any particular classes. They don't have to take them in any particular semester. So maybe they take a class in the fall and don't take a class in the spring. Maybe they're only taking one class versus a full course load, but they are going to be a part-time in the part-time division of the program. And that is different from the full-time approach. If your student is a full-time virtual student, typically that means that the virtual school is going to be their school of record. And that means they're no longer homeschooled. They are now going to be a full-time student taking their classes virtually. So with that, that means that you lose control as far as what courses your students take, because now they're told exactly what it is that they need to take in a particular year based on their grade level. And you don't control that. So they'll say, oh, you have to take an English, math, a science, a social studies, and then you get one elective. And that elective, because your student is in the 7th grade, has to be this. And they have to take that class before they can move on to. That's what you get into when you're talking about full-time enrollment in a virtual program. So please, if you are going to consider virtual education, make sure that you understand what options are available to you and your student. And if taking a full-time approach is going to now consider them to be a full-time student. And so what we do is my daughter does the part-time program. And the great thing about that is it does not mean that they can only take 1 or 2 classes. She could still take a full course load as a part-time student. She could take 4 classes if she wanted to, 5 classes if she wanted to, but because she is not a full-time enrolled student with their full-time program, she's not obligated to take 4 or 5 classes, and we can choose exactly which courses she does take in a particular semester. So again, I just wanted to make sure that you understood the differences there if you are interested in the virtual school approach. So let's talk about some pros of virtual school, particularly the part-time program. I've already mentioned this, but students can take classes as needed. So you don't have to take a set number of classes in a particular semester or in a particular year. My daughter typically takes 1 class at a time, maybe 2, depending on whatever else is going on in her life or what her schedule is looking like at any particular moment. And that's it. Like, she's not doing more than 2 at a time, because for us, that's not what we need. So you can take your classes as needed. And here in Florida, at least, your student can start their classes at any time of the year. So again, that's another difference between a part-time and that full-time enrolled student. Those full-time students start school on a particular day, August, whatever it is, and then their school year ends on a particular day, and they have to go to school each day, and there's requirements for all of that. Whereas part-time, you can start a course in February, you can start a course in October, whatever the case may be. Now, the caveat to that is your student's teacher will require that they do a certain amount of work in that course during a particular time. And so that could be a con, is that they kind of have to, they can work at their own pace, but after a while, like, they have to actually start to get stuff done and turn those assignments in. They can't just sit and do nothing for too long of a period of time. But for the most part, they really are not as strict about that. And your student can start their course throughout the year. Enrollment tends to be open year round. Another pro is that your students' courses are going to be taught by teachers who are certified by the state. And I talked about this a little while ago, just how state certification or teacher certification works here in Florida. And so when your student takes a virtual course, through their whatever your state's virtual program is, those teachers are actually certified. These are like legit teachers. They all have bachelor's degrees. They've all met certain requirements. They are all knowledgeable in whatever field of study they are teaching your child. So you can rest assured in that. Another pro is that there tend to be a wide variety of courses for your student to choose from if they are going to be taking classes in that virtual environment. So not only do you have those typical core courses in English, math, science, and the social studies, they also have access to electives. And a lot of times the electives and just the breadth of course that are offered virtually is going to be more extensive than what you will find in some public schools. So that's something as well. For instance, in most public schools here in Florida, when it comes to world languages, you'll get your typical Spanish, French, and maybe one other language, dependent on the demographics of that particular district. But with Florida Virtual in particular, we have, Spanish, French, you can do Italian, I think there is. They've got some Hebrew. My daughter does Mandarin, and she's actually in her 3rd year of Mandarin and then can do a 4th year. And I don't know, unless it's like a magnet school, any school in Florida, I'm sure some do exist, but any school in Florida that offers 4 full years of Mandarin or Chinese in the school. And again, we're talking public school, not private school. But if you know of any that do, then go ahead and leave me a comment down below, because I would be interested to see what are some of the other languages that are being offered by these school districts that you cannot just take through Florida Virtual or through virtual education. So again, that is another pro. The last one that I could think of is that the great thing about these virtual courses is because they are being offered typically by the state or some entity that is sponsored by the state. These schools are, for the most part, going to be accredited, which means when it comes time for your student to apply to college and universities, you're not going to have a problem getting that course approved. That course is not going to be scrutinized maybe the way that a parent-led or a co-op course would, because universities are going to recognize your state's virtual education program when you write that on your student's transcript. And I talked about transcripts in a couple of videos ago, so go back to that video where we were talking about starting your home education program. Go back to that one if you want a little bit more information about transcripts. But I'm also going to talk about transcripts in the next video, because step 3 in the process of starting your homeschool is keeping proper records. So stay tuned for that. But yes, they are going to see that on your student's transcript that you're creating, and they will know, okay, this was a legit course taught by a certified teacher. And they won't, like I said, they won't really second guess it the way that they might scrutinize a parent-led course. Some cons, though, of doing a virtual school program or a virtual school course. First con is that these courses are they have to state-approved curriculum. So if your reason for pulling your student out of the public school system or for homeschooling was to get away from the state curriculum, then this is probably not going to be a good option for you, because these teachers have certain things that they have to teach, because this is a course that was approved by the state. So there is no way for them to get around that. And so if this is going to be an issue for you, again, this probably is not going to be the best approach. Another con with this approach is that virtual teachers are going to assign a letter grade to your student. This is not necessarily a con for all families who are homeschooling, but there are going to be some families who don't want to have a letter grade attached to their students' schooling. You know, this depends solely on your philosophy of homeschooling. And so you may be a parent or a family who does not give final grades to your student for each individual course, or maybe the grades that you give, you allow those to be determined by factors other than how they scored on assessments. And again, because these are state approved courses, these teachers are going to be giving grades for each of the assignments that your students complete, each of the tests that your students take, and that is going to contribute to the grade that the teacher ultimately assigns to your student at the end of the course. So if that's not something that you're interested in, virtual might not be a good option for your family. And the next approach to education and curriculum that we'll talk about is dual enrollment. And so one thing that I want to say about dual enrollment is a lot of us, when we think about dual enrollment, we think being enrolled in a college or university. So you're maybe like an elementary, a family with elementary age kids, and you're like, dual enrollment? What are you talking about? That's not for me. Well, dual enrollment in actuality is really just any situation where your student is a homeschool student who's also taking classes at maybe, let's say, the local elementary school or private school, public school or private school in your area. So for instance, my daughter currently takes a course, she's in band at our local high school, and so she is dual enrolled at that high school. She also takes courses at the local college, so she's also dual enrolled at that college. So currently she has 2 dual enrollment situations that she is doing. So again, dual enrollment is not only referring to students like middle or high school students who are taking college level courses, but also can be any student who is taking a class at their local, either public or private school. And so this approach, I would say that the pros to dual enrollment are, again, similar to the co-op in that they get to take a class that maybe I would say you were not able to teach on your own. I don't play any instruments, so I'm not a band teacher, I'm not a music teacher, and therefore my daughter goes to a school with an actual teacher who is terrific, by the way. But so again, your student can take classes with teachers who have that expertise, have that knowledge that maybe you don't have. Another pro to this is it does provide an opportunity for your student to be for even just a little bit of time, a small amount of time in a school setting with other students. So if that's something that your student maybe misses from being in a traditional school, is having that interaction with other students, going to school every morning and sitting at a desk in a classroom and just being in that environment. If they miss that, then this is a great way for them to be able to do it, but it doesn't have to be for the entire school day. My daughter currently has 1 class at the local high school, and then she comes home and then does her other work. So this can be just a one-off type of thing, but make sure that you inquire with your school district to see what they allow and what they offer. A con to this is it can be tough on you as a parent to have to physically take, if this is the case, your student to that location every day, 5 days a week for the entire school year. Yeah, So that can be an issue. And again, if you have multiple students who are at multiple levels, one is taking a class at the elementary school, one at the middle school, one at the high school, this can become quite a bit for not only you, but for your kids as well. Another con is if you don't want your kid to be around other kids, and that was the reason why you withdrew them from the traditional school setting, this is not really going to be an option that you're going to want to pursue. And so the last con that I can think of as well is that you will actually need to go through the registration process for your student at their school. You'll have to have your documentation and go through all of that. And you will need to every year kind of update that information to ensure that your student will be allowed to be enrolled. And then with that, they may be limited to what courses they are actually able to take. Every school district handles this a little bit differently as far as what home education students can take and what they can't take. So just be aware of that and keep that in mind as you're considering this option. And so another option that I want to discuss with you is the hybrid approach. This is probably, there's no factual knowledge that I have to back this up, but I would assume that this is the most popular approach to homeschooling. And really what it means is you're just pulling from all of these different approaches that I just talked about, right? So like I mentioned, my daughter does dual enrollment at her local high school and college. She also does a virtual course here and there. We do some parent-led stuff. And so there's like, it's almost like a hodgepodge of approaches, and we put those together and see what works best for her. Because again, she's a junior in high school. There's no way that I could be able to teach her what it is that she's learning. I don't speak Mandarin. I don't play an instrument. I have not taken college level math or science in forever, so I can't teach those classes. But with a hybrid approach, I know where to go. I know what she needs to sign up for in order for her to be able to get what it is that she needs. So that's a great pro to hybrid, is you're just really pulling from what's going to work best for your student, and that's what it is. That's what you do. The negative, I would say, to the hybrid approach is because you're in all of these different places, it can get very overwhelming, particularly if you have multiple kids. So like I said, I take my daughter to the local high school in the morning, and then I have to pick her up, and then I go to work, and then she comes back and she does school. If she were also doing, let's say, she does dual enrollment, but at the local college, but she does it online. If she was doing that in person, I'd have to take her there. You know, I would have to be the one to facilitate all of that. If she were doing a co-op class, I'd have to take her there. I'd have to be involved in that. And so all of this can be time consuming. It can be stressful to be going from here to there and everywhere. Like I said, especially if you have multiple kids. If you are paying for all of this on your own, this can get expensive, right? This approach is not only you buying textbooks. It's not about you buying textbooks and teaching your kid yourself, but now you're paying for the co-op classes. If you have to pay, if you're responsible for paying dual enrollment for a college or university, you now have to pay that tuition, right? So this can all add up over time financially, and can be, just like I said, a stressful time for your family if you're going from place to place to place on a daily or weekly basis. So just something to consider. And I just did want to touch on this last approach. I'm going to do a complete video on it, so I won't talk about it too much today, but there is another approach that you can take called umbrella schooling. And really with umbrella school, it's a non-traditional private school That can either be a virtual school or something that your child or student is doing in person. And so the great thing about umbrella schools is that the school handles everything, right? So this is a non-traditional private school that you're going to actually enroll your student in. They will still be considered a homeschooled student. However, they are enrolled in that school, right? So that school is going to be their school of record. No longer is your homeschool the school of record. That school is a school of record. So they handle everything though. They handle the legal, they handle the academics, they handle the grades. Some of those schools are very comprehensive. Some of them are not as comprehensive, but at least you'll know that the legal part of your student being enrolled correctly in a home education program is taken care of. The con to this is that this does cost money. You know, these are private schools. Typically, the tuition is not as expensive as a traditional private school, but there is going to be some tuition involved in this scenario. So again, how much that is, and you know, if you have multiple kids, how much that is going to end up being in total can make this option cost prohibitive, just like some of the other options or approaches that you may want to take. But again, I'm going to create an entire video just about umbrella schools so that you can know what that whole approach is about and whether or not that is a good approach for you and your family to take. All right, if you have made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching and sticking in there with me. Hopefully this was useful for you and provided you with some great information about curriculum and how to go about teaching your kids. I know we did not talk about actual textbooks or, you know, things like that. And a lot of times when people hear curriculum, that's what they think about. But my thing about that is, number one, there's so many options to the actual textbooks that you could use to teach your kids on any particular subject matter that it could be. There's no way I could cover it in just one video. That's number one. But number two, it really is going to depend on your individual student. So think about it this way. Let's say that you buy a textbook for your sixth grader. And then when your next kid gets to sixth grade, you're like, oh, well, I'll just use that same textbook. Well, those kids are two completely different kids. And kid number two may not learn the same way that your first kid did. And that's going to render that textbook useless. So that's why this video was not specifically about the books, the textbooks, the materials to use with your students, because that's just too comprehensive of a topic for me to be able to cover in one video, particularly as it relates to your individual student. One of the great things about homeschooling is we get to do this and make these decisions and choices for ourselves. So I don't want to be the one to kind of tell you what book you should be using, what program you should be using, platform you should be using to teach your child. I'm giving you some information about approaches that you can take, and whatever approach you take, then you can start thinking about, if you're doing the parent-led approach, what books, what supplemental materials you want to use. So again, that's just my explanation on that. But again, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in that next video where I am talking all about your follow-up and your paperwork and documentation that you need to maintain in order to have a successful homeschool. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Happy homeschooling.